Hello and welcome to another Maine SBDC webinar. My name is Kelsey Reardon and I am with the state team hosted by the University of Southern Maine on the Portland campus. And we have another Maine SBDC at USM Business Advisor today, Chris Cole, who will be leading us through the startup checklist. So if you are looking to start a business, you are in the right place. We are the Maine Small Business Development Centers. And so we provide confidential, no-cost business advising to anyone in Maine. We are a national program, so each state has a program and each state has centers and business advisors at each center. So every state has their own program, but we are located throughout Maine. Like I said, Chris and I are both part of the Portland campus. But we have advisors who can help you either because they're the closest advisor to you, or also if you have a very specific question or industry you'd like to get into. We have a lot of advisors with really specific experience, so they can help you with just about anything you need help with. If we don't know the answers, we can find somebody who does. And so we are a really good resource to have because we can connect you with people throughout the state and nationally, actually. We have resources that are pretty impressive. So definitely get connected if you don't already have a business advisor. There's a big orange button on our website that says request advising, and that is the fastest way to get into our system. So this afternoon, I'll be sending out a follow-up email that will include a link to the recording of today's session and the slides and any other resources we mentioned, but it'll also have a link to request advising. So if you're not already set up, you don't need to go searching for that. I will send it all later. If you have any questions today, go ahead and stick those in the chat. But if a question comes up later, you can respond to any email that you've gotten from me and it will definitely end up in the same place. My contact information, as well as Chris's, will be in the follow-up. So you'll be able to connect with everyone. Like I said, if you have any questions, just stick them in the chat down there. But otherwise, I think we're ready to get started. So I'll pass it over to Chris.
Great. Thank you, Kelsey. Thank you, everyone, for showing up this morning on probably one of the nicest days I've seen out there lately. It's absolutely gorgeous. So I appreciate you taking the time to be here. As Kelsey said, I am a SBDC advisor, and I've been with the SBDC for almost 3 years as an advisor. However, I've actually been an SBDC client for like 3 decades, starting with my very first business, which was gluten-free sauces and condiments. Back then, nobody knew what gluten was or why you shouldn't use it, or why you shouldn't eat it. But at any rate, I continued using the services of the SBDC just because they're great. And as Kelsey said, they are free resources, one of the best free resources in the state for businesses. And with that said, we'll go on to our next slide if this is working for me. Kelsey and I were just having this discussion how this didn't work the last time.
We always say technology is great.
There we go. All right, excellent. So, simple housekeeping, as Kelsey said, it will be emailed to you. Put your questions in chat, and that's about it. So this lists everything that we do. Kelsey pretty much went over it, and I know quite a few people on this call are already clients. So those are the services that we provide. And we'd like to start today, if you wouldn't mind putting in the chat where you are in the business development process. And I forgot to ask everybody, but if you would also at some point let me know what type of business you're in. I probably should ask you that in the first place. But for this poll, you can either put in a 1, 2, 3, or 4, or a 5. So if you're thinking about starting a business, if you have an idea but you don't know where to start, if you're already doing sales, which I've talked to some clients who've done sales, but they're not officially in business, any of those options, if you wouldn't mind putting them in the chat. And then let me see if I can see. So far I have 2. Let's see. All right, excellent. It looks like I have a lot of 2s and a couple 1s here. So I see somebody's already in business. Excellent. Great. So I think you've come to the right place if you have an idea and you don't know where to start. So we're just going to go over kind of the things about getting started. And then also, if you don't know what type of business yet, hopefully an SBDC advisor could help you kind of glean that out based on what you like to do. All right. I think there we go. So I put this in before we even start the checklist. And this is a conversation that I have a lot of times with folks in, truly before you begin a business, when you're in this formation stage, you kind of want to know where you are personally, and then what do you need for your own home budget? And that's truly important, right? Because many times people will say, well, when we do their projections, they're not putting any income in for themselves. And really, a business is designed to generate income. So if there's no income in there, then that truly is a hobby. Okay. We understand when you first start out, you probably can't draw money out of your business, but the goal is to be able to eventually have it pay, even if it's a part-time business. So also, how is this going to affect your family dynamic? Those are some hard conversations. If you're going to need business financing, your FICO score is really important. So if it's below 650, just go look at your credit score, see about fixing any items in there and getting your house in really good order, because then it will put you in a much better position to get business credit. And also, if you do need a loan, you'll be in a better position, better interest rate, better terms for your financing. All right. So this is the checklist that we're going to go over. And, every single item here is really important no matter what type of business that you're doing. So we'll go over each item in a little more detail. Oops, sorry. And then how to use this checklist. So, I think the thing about the checklist is that it pretty much follows almost in a step-by-step order what's important. So, for example, one of the first things we talk about is marketing. And we're going to talk about marketing from the standpoint of what you need to do first before actually doing the marketing, but like finding out the information about who your customer is or who might want to buy your product, right? So marketing research, primary research, that's done by collecting the data yourself. All right. So you're going to do some feasibility studies. You might actually go, and if you have like a Facebook page, you could put polls out there to people, or if you're in direct contact with people, do surveys directly with them. And then your primary research, truly is getting at your target market. And then your secondary research, that's when we're looking at existing data and some of the tools that we have at the SBDC are like, we have SBDC Net, which is a great tool. We can actually put in your specific type of business. Let's say you want to open a hairdressing shop on Exchange Street in Portland, all right? And then we can put in that information and get back some really good data, like who your competition is, what other people are charging, what am I trying to say? How many people live in the area and kind of who would use your services. And then we have a broader tool called Vertical IQ, which shows us general trends. And that's we have access to. So, but really getting out and talking to your customers is probably the best market research you can do. So your business plan. And I'm going to repeat what my colleague Ann did when she did this. And I'm just going to ask people if they could just put in a chat, yes or no, do you think you need a business plan? All right. Looks pretty much everybody is on the yes. So absolutely. Thank you. And thanks for participating. So yes, a business plan truly is important. And I kind of break it down to two important pieces. There's the narrative and the numbers. So the narrative speaks about what your business is and how you're going to operate. And then the numbers really should reflect that. All right. So it's interesting. A while back, I had a gentleman come to me. He wanted to start a trucking business, and he gave me a business plan. I believe he had purchased it. And we had had many discussions before he showed me his business plan. And the business plan was for a fleet of trucks. And he was talking to me about just having one truck himself and then eventually hiring someone else. And I said, these numbers in this plan don't reflect everything that you've told me. So it really wants to be reflective of what you plan on doing for your business. And every item in this is really important. This little graphic on the side, competitor analysis. You know, you want to know who's doing the same thing that you're doing, what they're charging, what's their hours of operation, what do they do really good. And I always try to say, people, be positive about your competition. You know, you don't want to say, oh, they're terrible, they're lousy, but you can say, you know, I've heard their customer service isn't very good. That's one of the things I'm going to address in my business. So what you're going to do better in your competitive analysis. Also, you know, your mission statement. What are you about? Why did you start this business? What's important to you about running this business? And then, of course, when we look at, you know, financial planning, and we'll dive into that more when we talk about your cash flow later on here. And everybody answered that, so thank you. So choosing a legal entity. And when we look at this, there are some factors that go into choosing a legal entity, like if you have investors, and how that's going to be structured, if you have employees or contractors. So there are different types of entities. Taxation goes into it, and of course, liability. So liability, risk, and taxation are a few things that we ask people to look at. And I put a link in here to our business entities and legal structure playlist, because I think that really addresses those concerns, and it tells you what the differences are between being a sole proprietor, an LLC, an S Corp. Those are the three most common that we work with for small businesses, and partnerships come in there as well. So though that's what you want to consider, and also the type of item that you're making. So sometimes you're a single owner, and you might just be, in the landscaping business. And that's, you know, relatively low risk, as into that you're probably not going to hurt somebody. But maybe you're manufacturing chainsaws. And I stole that from Peter Harriman, my supervisor, but it's a good one. That's a much higher risk and possibility that you might get sued if something goes wrong. So then you may want to consider like an LLC, which would give you a little, you know, it defines you from the business. So it gives you a little more protection than being just a sole proprietor. All right, naming. So in the state of Maine, pretty much you can pick your own name. As far as if you're in a town, and you can use your own personal name, like you can say, like here, Jimmy's Hot Dogs, right? Or even your last name, like my last name's Cole. Maybe I run a repair shop. I'll say Cole's Repair. But you are required to go to your town and register if that's, you know, that's for a sole proprietor. But when you decide if you're going to be an LLC, that's a different route. You're going to go, and we have a whole step-by-step guide how to register as an LLC, but you actually look at, we have a clearinghouse on the Maine.gov website that shows you, you can just type in whatever name you'd like to name your business for the LLC. And if somebody else already has that name, it will let you know. And if they don't, then you can register that name. And that name is only good in the state of Maine, okay? And as far as like DBAs goes, so doing business as, if you are already an existing LLC. So for instance, one of my businesses that I had was a restaurant, and I started it with a business partner, and we fused our two names. We decided to be an S corporation. We fused our two last names. So it was Mako Inc. But that's not what we did business as. So we had a restaurant named Stone's Cafe, and that was our DBA. And then later on, I registered for another DBA when I started a wholesale bake shop. And it's a one-time fee of $125, I believe, with the state to register your DBA. But then you can use that name instead, and you can also take that to your bank so that your bank can accept checks in that name for you as well. When we get into protection and trademarking, and Kelsey and I, gosh, it was probably a year and a half ago, but it was great. We had an attorney from the US Patent and Trademark Office do a great presentation about trademarking. And the fact of the matter is that it's expensive to do it on a national level. And you also want to be willing to protect your trademark, which means taking legal action if somebody uses your name. So a couple of years ago in the state of Maine, Holy Donuts, all right, which is a Maine-based company, they had registered and trademarked their name, and they trademark every iteration of Holy and Donut, right? Spelling different ways, all of that. And way over on the West Coast, this little mom and pop shop opened, and they called themselves Holy Donuts, spelled it differently. But Holy Donuts in Maine had their attorney send them a cease and desist letter. And the Holy Donuts on the West Coast were like, well, no, we don't want to. And then the people in Maine said, well, we're now going to have to take legal action, right? But that's why you would do a trademarking. And in their case, it's because they continue to expand, and I'm sure their broad vision is they probably want to be across the country, so they don't want somebody else to have that name. Now, in the state of Maine, you can register your own trade name, which is really only good in the state of Maine, and that's a $60 fee. But again, if your trade name is already used, like you couldn't be Coca-Cola in Maine because we already know that's a registered trademark. But if it's already being used and controlled in another, on a national level, somebody else already has this nationally trademarked, you still can't use it. And it's very rare that you want to trademark. Again, if you want to start franchising, if you want to go beyond Maine, then it's a consideration. And that's a good use of an attorney, which we'll talk about in a little bit. All right, location. So, during the pandemic, we figured out that there's not necessarily a need for a brick and mortar. So many businesses ended up figuring out how to do e-commerce, right? And online sales. However, if you're, still like running a cafe, it's important that you have a good location and parking and things like that. Or if you have a gift shop, you don't want to be out in the middle, and I'm saying a gift shop you want people to come into. You don't want to be in the middle of nowhere for your location. All right. And as far as renting or leasing or buying, right? Those are all considerations. And we know with the cost of real estate now, that's a huge consideration for folks, because sometimes when you're renting or leasing, you end up in a situation where somebody new comes along, buys the building, and then the rent goes up and all of that. So for a long-term strategy, you have to figure out what is going to be best for your business. Again, the priorities come in here, and excuse me. I just wanted to give one example as far as locations go. My father, for years and years and years, his business was producing trade shows. And very rarely did we ever have anybody come in the office because my dad was always on the road making sales. So it wasn't as important that he had a high visibility location. But then later on, my dad was a serial entrepreneur. Later on, my dad purchased some radio stations, and he ended up building, and it's still on Route 1 in Freeport, but it looks like a lighthouse. And that was so that he could get visibility, people coming up 295 and Route 1 heading to the coast of Maine, because his first radio station was WCME, which stood for Coast of Maine. So in that case, it was really important that he had good visibility. So those are the things that you want to consider when you're looking at your location. And zoning. Sorry, I sometimes get ahead of this, but it is important to know that what you want to do is zoned correctly. Recently, I've been working with somebody who wants to put a brewery in, and we're learning that there are so many regulations now on breweries and where they can be, what zone they can be in, and things like that. So you really want to know your industry and what the appropriate zone is before you sign a lease. Insurance. So when it comes to insurance, we're going to look at all these different ones. And I just want to ask folks, as far as, do you think that every person needs all of these insurances? If you can just quickly put yes or no in, that would be great. And then we'll go over them. All right, so we see a yes in here. Exactly, Andrea. Thank you. Depending on the kind of business, Heather's saying no. Yep, Connor, no. So it is true. It really depends on what you're doing. General liability, business insurance, absolutely. I highly recommend every business has that, even if you're just like a graphic artist. Okay. So liability insurance will protect you if for some reason, somebody sues you, and you think, well, I'm a graphic artist, I'm not going to do something that's going to hurt somebody. But if they, believe that you didn't design their logo or whatever it is correctly, and they sue you, business liability is going to help protect you. We know workers' comp is, if you have employees in the state of Maine, you are required to have workers' compensation for your employees. If you are an owner, even if it's an S corporation or an LLC, you do not have to have workers' comp on yourself. You can choose not to as an owner. Health insurance, right? So we know that that's becoming more attractive for employees if they can find a job with health insurance. And the marketplace in Maine, it's making it much simpler for people to set up HSAs within their business to help their employees, especially if you have few employees, right? It's a big expense. And then auto and property. Well, if you use the auto in the commission of your business, like if you're an electrician and you have a truck full of equipment that you drive to, to different sites, you're certainly going to want to insure your automobile, and then property. And then key man insurance. So a lot of people haven't heard about this. Anne brought this up in the last session of doing the startup checklist. And I had forgotten this. My dad actually had key man insurance. And this is if you are a sole owner, in particular, a sole proprietor, typically. And if you become incapacitated, the key man insurance will protect your business and your assets. And then the last thing I'm going to talk about a little bit is bonding. So bonding happens, and bonding is not, it's kind of like an insurance, but it's not. You actually buy surety bonds. And what it does is it protects your customer. And typically that happens if you are doing like large commercial cleaning business, or if you're government contracting. So in some states require that you have bonding done. So you actually purchase the bonds, and then that pays for anything. In particular, theft is one of the items, or non-performance of a contract. So that's what bonding does. All right, licenses and permits. So in Maine, there's a lot of different industries, and certain industries require licenses, right? So, and it's funny, in the food industry, which that's kind of my wheelhouse, depends on what kind of food activity you're doing, depends on who you're going to get the license from. And we did a whole webinar on that. But you really have to look into this, what you need for your particular license. And Maine Business Answers is a really good resource for that. Okay. And then also permits. So if if you have a food truck and you want to bring it to a certain, like downtown Freeport or something like that, you're going to need to get a permit. So, you get licenses usually typically through the state. And then there are also professional licenses. Like if you're a therapist or a nurse or even a hairdresser, you need, a professional license. But then if you want to perform, business in a certain town, you're probably going to need a permit from the town to do that. And you might even need to get licensed. Like the city of Portland, they have their own licensing divisions for different types of businesses. And also it's good to note here that if you're planning, certain types of businesses, let's say you want to open up a pub, those types of licenses can take a much longer than other types. So you have to plan accordingly. And, back to the city of Portland, not to pick on Portland, but because there's so much activity going on. I know recently, most of the clients that I've been working with that want to build out a business, in particular in the food industry, they, excuse me, they're projecting 8 months to a year before opening just to get through all the permitting and licensing process. So those are considerations that you might need for your business as well. All right. And we just talked about Business Answers. This is a great resource that you can use. You can email them directly, but they do have a lot of answers right on the website. And that's going to lead me into the next one here, which is maine.gov. So many years ago, when I started my very first business, we didn't have such a great resource. And this really is a good resource. It pretty much has all the answers that you need when you're looking at, like it says, just to register for Maine sales and use tax and things like that. And we're going to talk about sales and use in a moment. But you can resource all of these items. And if you don't, because it's not always clear, because we know it's written in legalese a lot, you can call. In many, many cases, you can call. I highly recommend that if you call an official, like within the Department of Agriculture, for example, and they give you an answer, ask them to give you an email response so that you have that, especially if it's not quite clear. So if in the future there's any question, you're in good shape with that. All right, financing. And I can see where you get a little fatigued doing this webinar. So excuse me, I'm a little punchy at this point. I'm just going to breathe for a moment. Financing is the biggest consideration really for your business. Because if you don't have enough money to run your business, then it's going to be difficult to continue your business. And that's why we spend a lot of time on financing. And, we know that if you don't make the correct assumptions for your business, that if you run out of money, you won't be in business anymore. So we're going to go to the next one, which is sources and uses of funds. Has anybody here, and you can just say yes or no, done a sources and uses of funds for your business? If you would just put it in the chat for me, please. And if you don't know what that is, it's fine. We can just go over that. Okay, I see some yeses and nos here. So it looks like it's pretty even on, right, sources and uses. So when you go to a bank for a loan, they're going to want to look at your sources and uses sheet. So in the sources and uses, we're going to list all the items that you need for your business. So if you are going to rent a space and you need to renovate that space, we're going to put in the budget for renovations. If you need to purchase equipment, like if you're a hair salon and you need to purchase the chairs and the dryers and the sinks, and you need to have plumbing done and electrical update it, things like that. All of those items will be listed in sources and uses. So it's a separate tab. When we look at cash flow next, it's a separate tab in your cash flow sheet, but it really lets us know what you need and then where that money's going to come from to fund those items. And we put in working capital too, because we know that the minute you open a door doesn't necessarily mean people are going to come rushing in and start putting money into your business. So, as I said, the biggest reason why a lot of businesses fail is because they are undercapitalized. They just don't have enough money to get to that next month. And this usually happens within the first 3 years of a place being in business. So planning is so important. And that's why we're talking about cash flow projections next. So I like to put all these up instead of waiting for them to come in. But it gives us the feasibility. All right. Is this really feasible? So when we look at it, if, for instance, I was working with a client before, and they were making a product, and we realized when we did their cash flow projections, after we put everything in, their rent and all of that, that the product that they were producing, and that we didn't even get their labor in there, they were losing like 20 cents per item that they were selling. So they basically were giving it away and additionally losing 20 cents on top of that. That's feasibility, right? And then we do cash flow projections, because if you need financing, if you need a loan, the bank's going to want to see that. All right. And again, pricing and hiring decisions. Again, if you figure, well, I can sell 500, of this certain item in a month, and then after I get done with all my projections and I realize that at the end of the month, I'm not making any money, or worse, I'm losing money after I pay for my staff and my location and utilities and everything else, then we have to make some adjustments to pricing. And again, hiring decisions. Is there enough money to be able to hire people? Is this business going to make enough money to hire people? In budgeting, which is really important, like where down the line am I going to be able to, when we do cash flow projections, we're going to look at 3 years. And I know that sounds overwhelming, but that's why SBDC advisors are here to help you. Usually my clients can tell you that I've worked with is I will pre-fill a cash flow sheet to get somebody started. And then we work on it together. All right. And then when we look at 3 years, so maybe you need to buy, like if you're making sauces or something and you want to bottle a piece of bottling equipment. So where in the budget, at what point, can we plan for that? So that's budgeting. And then seasonality, right? This is so important, especially in this state, because we know the curve isn't, it's not straight, it's a curve, it's up and down. I could tell you 13 years in the last restaurant that I had, my best months and my worst months, and I would have to put money aside to make sure I could get through those real slow March, April, believe it or not, March, April, May were worse than January and February for me. So knowing the seasonality and budgeting for that, and also setting goals, being able to give people raises, maybe even being able to expand your business, getting another location. These are all reasons why we work on cash flow. And this is just a real straightforward cash flow sheet. It's one that I can send folks, and you could also use this for your budgeting purposes when you initially start as well. I have one that's a little more sophisticated, and again, like I said, I can send that one to you as well. I'd be happy to work with folks on it. Taxes. So I touched on this a little bit prior. These are all the different taxes you have to consider. So we have our personal income taxes, and everybody that works, if you work for somebody else or if you work for yourself, we all have to pay income taxes. And in the state of Maine, you have to pay state income taxes as well as federal income taxes. And income taxes really are based on your adjusted gross income. So how much money you make, and people are in different tax brackets depending on how much money you make. The more money you make, the higher your bracket you're in. And then we have self-employment taxes. So if you are an LLC or a sole proprietor, okay, so you're not on a payroll, you have to pay self-employment taxes. We usually say to folks, figure between 25 and 30% of what you're bringing in that you want to put aside for taxes, and that bringing in after expenses, okay, because you can deduct your expenses. Payroll taxes. So in Maine, payroll taxes are about 7.5%. If you are paying employees, and if you have yourself on payroll too, you'll have to pay payroll taxes. And then we have sales tax in Maine. So in Maine, like just a retail sales, 5.5%. If you are a food business like a restaurant, that's 8%, and then lodging is 9%. And sales tax is something that I usually don't put in people's cash flow sheets when we're doing projections, because the way I view it is, it's not your money. It belongs to the state of Maine. So, the best thing to do about sales tax is when it comes in, put it in a separate account so it doesn't get mixed up with your operating money, because the state's going to want that either on a monthly basis, depending on what your revenue is, or a quarterly basis. And if you miss those marks, they will charge you interest and penalties for not paying on time. There are some businesses in Maine that don't require sales tax. And again, if you're not sure, Business Answers, you can look it up to see if you should be charging sales tax. As well as if you're buying products, like if you're a gift shop and you're buying, t-shirts and hats and things like that from somebody else to resell in your business, you want to get a resale certificate. And therefore you can sell the items and it's not double taxed. So you get to buy it from the producer tax free, but then you charge the tax, the end user gets taxed on that item. So these are all the things about taxes. We definitely recommend that you hire a professional because we're all generalists here. We'll help you as much as we can, but we can't do your taxes for you. So that's what CPAs are for, bookkeepers are for. Some people use QuickBooks or TurboTax. If you feel comfortable with that, you can do as well. Depends on the sophistication of your business, how you want to do your taxes. Do I need an attorney? Well, you probably do. I usually recommend that you at least know of an attorney before you start your business. Reach out, find one that's in your area of expertise and your price range. So lots of times attorneys are not equal price. I know some attorneys charge upwards of $600 an hour. Some attorneys are $200 or $300 an hour. Some attorneys have a flat fee just to review items for you. So entity formation, if you are going to be a partnership or an S corporation, highly recommend that you have an attorney help you with that formation. Lots of times, if you're going to be a limited liability corporation, you can file those articles yourself with the state, do your own filing, especially if it's single member. It's not that sophisticated. If it's multi-member, you probably want an attorney on that again. But for partnerships as well, if it's you and another person going into business together, you want in a partnership or to consider a partnership agreement. Okay. And a good attorney will talk to you about what's going to happen if one of you decides that you want to leave the business, or if, you have a falling out. Okay. And, what's going to happen to the business, who gets first rights to it, things like that. And when we go into business together, we all think this is great. It's never going to happen. But believe me, it can happen, and you will be very thankful that you had this discussion with an attorney beforehand instead of paying an attorney a lot of money later. So another reason is leasing or purchasing, all right? Or if you're selling your business, but we're looking at startup here. So if you're going to sign a lease first, please do not sign a lease until at least you talk to us about it. So many times I have people come to me and say, I'm so excited, I just signed this lease. Now I need help with my business plan. Well, that should be the other way around, right? We should have a business plan first about what you really want to do, then find a place that fits it, and then really have an attorney review your lease agreement. There is a lot of language in there, and sometimes you can be hit with all kinds of charges that you don't even understand while you're hit with. I recently read a lease that had a base rent, CAM charges, which is common area maintenance. They also had a charge for real estate taxes and a charge for operational. And I was like, oh my goodness, that's a lot of charges. And they had a lot of language in there about being personally responsible and not the business. And again, I said, we need to take this to an attorney, and, you know, somebody can really read this, and they're also going to edit that contract and send it back so that there's a negotiation there. And understand that when you're looking at a lease or a purchase and sale agreement, that it's negotiable. And then other types of contracts, if you are a Maine guide and you want to have a waiver of liability, really need to have an attorney read that. Lots of times I have people say, oh, I just printed this off, you know, from this website. Well, you still want to make sure that it's legal. The contract is legal in the state of Maine. Or if, like, you're doing consignment with other people's products, want to make sure that it's legal and then it's binding. So, or if you're, you know, if you're performing a service like catering an event, again, legal and binding. You know, if you're catering an event for like 300 people and you require a deposit, and then the people cancel, you know, at what point, you know, when do you get your money, or whose money is it? Do they get the return of the deposit? So all of these things should be spelled out. And again, that's what an attorney is really good for. So they can be definitely worth their money. Tax identification number. So an EIN or a TIN. Your EIN is your employer identification number, and TIN is tax ID number. So lots of times, and they're both the same, but lots of times I'll say to folks, you need an EIN, you know, once you do your LLC filing, okay? And they say, well, I'm not going to have employees, but it is still called an EIN. You can call it a TIN, but for the IRS's purposes, you file for your EIN, all right? And it really is your business social security number. So do I need one? If you're a sole proprietor, you do not need one, because your social security number, you are the business. So it does go against your social security number. If you are an LLC or an S corporation or anything beyond that, you need an EIN, okay? Because that establishes the business as its own entity. In most cases, you should get one. And I actually have a friend who is a sole proprietor, and they have an EIN just to have a business number that's separate from their own social security number. So they're not putting their social security number out on every form. So you certainly can get one. And the nice thing is they are absolutely free. So those websites out there, when you're doing internet searches that say, you know, we'll register your business for you and get you your EIN and everything else, and it's, you know, $375. Well, you don't need that, okay? It's free. And an EIN, especially if you decide to be an LLC or an S corporation, some type of entity, once you have your articles of formation approved from the state of Maine, and they're like, yep, we accept you as a business, then you go to irs.gov and you file for free. So no charge to do that. All right. If you want to hire employees, so in the state of Maine, excuse me, there are lots of steps and rules. And and they're in place, in a lot of places to protect the employee. And the employer too. I shouldn't say just the employee, but many of these rules and regulations concerning workers were really established because during the turn of the century, children could work, people could work 70, 80 hours a week, and there were no rules around that. So there are rules in place, to really protect people, which is important. So we have a excellent, and I meant to put it in here, but my colleague did a webinar on it about hiring employees in the state of Maine. And I'm sure Kelsey could send that link after this webinar so you can view it, but it's really good. And also on our e-learning platform, there's a course that you can take about how to hire in the state of Maine. So I also want to touch on an employee versus an independent contractor. To be clear, an independent contractor is somebody that uses their own tools and that you don't control their schedule. So for instance, if you own a machine shop and somebody comes in and they make products for your machine shop, let's say, using your tools, they are an employee. You cannot hire them as an independent contractor. Now, if they, excuse me, if they perform a service, like I have a client that has a yoga business, and yep, she provides the space for them, but they're all independent contractors because they are performing their own service under their own guidance based on the hours that they agreed to work. So they're not employees. So if you're concerned, again, check with the Maine Business Answers. And also there is an independent contractor form that you can review, and it will show you the differences, and then you can actually send it to the state to have the Department of Labor sign off on it and say, yes, this person is an independent contractor as compared to an employee. And then it's important that you do have policies in place for your business and for yourself. Employee handbooks, they don't have to be this really in-depth, lengthy thing, but it really should, pretty much spell out what the business is going to do for the employee and what the expectation of the employee is and how the business operates, okay? And when you're hiring employees, you have payroll. So I don't know about you, but payroll taxes are kind of complex. And the first thing I did when I got my restaurant was I met with a payroll company. It's probably one of some of the best money I ever spent, because they took care of all the filings and regulations between state and federal. And I paid them per check and per quarter or whatever it was. But it was a lot less hassle than trying to do it myself. I mean, I had 20 staff, so for certain I wasn't going to do payroll for everybody. But also sometimes you get in a situation where you have an employee that may need to have wages garnished for child support or other reasons. And, if you're doing it yourself, it's a little more difficult to take care of those items. Now, with that said, there are software systems like QuickBooks that you can set up and do payroll in if you want to. If you only have 1 or 2 employees, you probably can do it yourself. I have a good friend whose family owns a garage and gas station, and she actually does the payroll still for the 5 employees for it. So that makes sense for them. But really, you want to make sure that it makes sense for you. And then scheduling, right? Make sure that people are not going into overtime unless you build that into your budget. And if you're a hands-on owner like I was, make sure that you are available when people don't show up. So, grand opening. Whew. So we've gone through all of this and we're getting ready to do our grand opening. A couple things about grand opening. 1, do a soft opening first. Absolutely. Don't have it be your very first day. And soft opening could be having friends and family, do some dry runs, things like that to get yourself ready. And then you want to do marketing around it and connect with your local chamber of commerce. They really love to be part of a grand opening, and that will bring you some free press as well. Also, talk to your SBDC advisor, because we'd love to be there. And Kelsey, one of her favorite things to do is success stories here. So we love to feature you as well. You can do things like giveaways and free samples, but you definitely want to be ready for that grand opening. And sometimes grand openings happen even if you want them to or not. I remember when I bought my restaurant, and after we bought it, it was already existing. So we did renovations, and when we finally got it open, it was a floodgate. I mean, I wish that we had just taken a little more time, and we didn't even advertise a grand opening, but it was so localized that people knew when it was time to open, and everything that could go wrong did go wrong, so you really want to try and work out the kinks before you have a grand opening, because, like the old saying goes, you only have one chance to make a first impression with folks. So I think we went through the purposes of this webinar. Hopefully everybody got something out of it. I thank you for your time and for listening to me going on and on and on. But I just, again, wanted to highlight our e-learning platform. And there's a lot of good resources on there, as well as our YouTube channel, which I know when Kelsey does this, she'll send out links about the YouTube channel. So I don't know if there are questions in the chat, or if anybody wants to unmute themselves and ask me a question directly, I'd be happy to answer.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Chris. Thank you, everyone, for joining. This was great. There are a couple of questions that have come through. And like Chris said, I will include the e-learning platform is in my follow-up email. And the link to the recording of today's session will take you straight to our YouTube channel. So you'll have access to all of those things. There were a couple questions that came in early on when they were talking about like naming.
Sure.
And so someone was asking, what about DBAs for S Corps? And I'm not sure if you touched on that or not.
Yeah, so I felt like I talked a million miles a minute. So I'm sorry. So if you're an S Corp, and I did this with my S Corp as well. So I had the incorporating name, and then I had a DBA for my restaurant. And again, it's that, and there's a form that you fill out. It's $125, and it's called an assumed name in the state of Maine. If you are a foreign corporation, doesn't mean that you're from another country, but foreign to the state. If you're an out-of-state corporation, you can get a fictitious name within the state of Maine. That's a different thing. But if you're already in the state of Maine, it's called an assumed name, and it's $125 to do that. And you can have more than one DBA. I actually had two because I had a wholesale bakery as well in a different location that required a different license. But that's for a different webinar about the different licenses. So I hope that answers your question.
If for any reason it didn't, feel free to continue. I think the same person was asking, is health insurance required for small businesses?
It is not. Is not at this time. So I think when I say it's not, I mean, there's a threshold, and I believe it's 50 employees or more that you have to offer health insurance. But you do have other things that you're required in the state of Maine, like the earned time off. So, which is a newer rule, and I believe that's 5 employees or more. That you need to have, for them to be able to accrue time off so that they can have sick time. So it averages out that if an employee works 40 hours a week, year round, they accrue 5 days worth of PTO time, I think it's called. But as far as health insurance, like I said, it's a higher threshold on that. And there are, insurance provisions that can help you if you're thinking about doing health insurance, like Marketplace is a good one to work with. They could actually set up plans, HSA plans for your businesses that are going to be less expensive than if you go directly to like Anthem or Pilgrim or somebody big.
Yeah, the other thing I'm seeing more of is like offering a stipend.
Right.
So not providing the insurance, but offering a stipend that might cover.
Right. And that's why like an HSA is great. to set up, because it really doesn't cost you anything to do it, and the employee can put money away pre-tax, for them.
And then there are some questions about grants and funding, which we know that many people come to these looking for that. So this person is interested in learning about grants available to start new businesses and what the best business loans to get with COVID response money are, I suppose is the question.
Okay, I need a little more elaboration about with COVID response money. Do you have COVID money and you're looking to get a loan? Whoever you are, you can unmute and just let me know.
So it's me. I don't know if you can see me. So when I look at the starting the new business for Maine, there is federal money that Maine got, and there are grants available. It said to check back for 2023.
Yep. Yeah. So there were two programs that were released by the state, which are going through, I believe it's FAME, Maine.
FAME, F-A-M-E.
Yeah, F-A-M-E.
That's the website that I found it on.
Yep. And so one is Thrive and one is Grow. I think the Thrive, I believe, and I'm probably saying them backwards, so Kelsey, correct me, but I think the Thrive was for COVID affected businesses. So that was absolutely a grant. The Grow is not a grant. It is, they have some matching funding, and they have a low interest loan program going on.
Okay. And that's considered the FAME direct loan?
No, that's a different thing. So there is a portion, if you go on to FAME's website, there is an area that you can find either Thrive or Grow, and then just look under those two items. The other thing that is available is, and it depends on your income. So if you are a low to moderate income individual wanting to start a business, there is community development block grants that happen, and they're on a rolling basis. So right now we're actually out of funding because we don't, just so people understand, the SBDC, we don't have money. All right, we don't give out, we're not the SBA, even the SBA doesn't give money directly, but we're not, an organization that gives out the money. Usually what happens is the state or the organization, wants Maine or the Maine SBDC to help kind of oversee. So what we usually do is we're the ones responsible to take in your application and, gather the information and then say, turn it over to the state so that the state's not processing these applications that don't qualify. For instance, I had somebody who was looking for a community development block grant. We went through the application process, everything else. When they sent me their tax returns, unfortunately, their adjusted gross income was too high to meet that threshold. So I'm like, you can't apply because the state's just going to kick it back, right? So that's our role, is typically to just, kind of be the middle person, so to speak, on those items. And like I said, I know, what county do you live in?
I live in Waldo, but my business will be in Knox.
Okay. Your county might still have community development block grant money. So that would be something that could be looked into. I know York County.
Waldo?
Yeah.
Through Waldo.
Yeah. Well, and it would actually be through a CEI, an SBDC advisor. So, and it probably is somebody from CEI, but we could look at that and see if there's any funding in your county left.
Okay. So after this, then we get linked up with like a coach or an advisor.
Sure.
Right. Yep. And then you kind of work us through the process. Because I'm ready to start submitting all of my paperwork, because I'm trying to purchase a building to put my restaurant in. And it's going to happen pretty quickly, and it all is contingent on whether I'm able to get the loan or not.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. So, and it might be that you don't qualify for a grant, and then you really need to look at a loan. And truly, local banks in the state of Maine are extremely business friendly, and they have the best products. So I highly recommend people stay local. You know, a lot of the savings like Bangor, Bath, Machias, Gorham, and many others, right? Kennebuck Savings, Saco Biddeford, and even credit unions do business lending now too. So those are usually a good place to start. An SBDC advisor can help you with that as well. We usually help people get bank ready so that they can get the loan and that they don't have like a bank. And lots of times bank will push people back to us too, right? So if you don't have an SBDC advisor and you present your business plan and the bank's like, well, it really needs some work, the bank won't help you with that. That's not their job, but they will send you to an SBDC advisor or a SCORE advisor to get you ready.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Does anybody else have questions or any other questions there, Kels?
I didn't see any other questions, but I just wanted to reiterate the request for advising link will be in my follow-up email. So you can just go ahead and fill out that form. And I think that there are options in the form to write what you are looking for help with. So at that point, you could just mention those things and the advisor would be able to help you move forward. But I don't see any other questions. So if anybody has any, stick them in there quick or respond to any of my emails. I wanted to thank you all for joining us today. And thank you, Chris, as always. This is great. We're getting thank yous in the chat as well.
Yeah, and I just want to say one other thing. And I can only see your number, so I don't see a name for you. But even though you're in Waldo County and I'm in Cumberland County, if you want to request me, because restaurants are in my wheelhouse, I'd be happy to do it. So you can, when you request advising, you can put down somebody specific. So not to say somebody in your area wouldn't be great, because all of our SBDC advisors are excellent. So just an offer.
Yes, and I can confirm all of our advisors are fantastic. All of our advisors are generalists, so they can help with most things. But we do have advisors with very specific experience, and Chris has very specific restaurant experience, which helps our clients, but also helps us because I got scones yesterday. So thank you all so much.
Everyone.
This was great. We'll see you next time.